Automatic sales? Well, who wouldn't want that? We may not be there yet, but we're getting close. There are over 7,000 technologies in the MarTech world these days, and here are samplings of how today's innovators sell and market.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness future proof.
Eric Kavanagh here. We got a lineup of experts in the sales automation space, folks. And let's face it, that's important stuff out there. A lot of people diss on sales people, like those sales guys, which I think is crazy. First of all, they're sales girls too. They can be just as good, if not better, than the guys. And guess what? Without sales, you got nothing. Sales makes the entire business run, whatever it is that you're doing. Well, of course, you could be a government operation. That's not quite the same thing. But in the commercial world out there, you need salespeople to go and push the message. And these days, guess what? There's a ton of competition out there, just all over creation. And the margins are thin. And so salespeople have to get better and better. And let's face it, there are some certain things that your standard salesperson, if there is such a thing, can be really good at. I heard one of our guests talk in the pre-show today about keeping your salespeople in the zone where they're the most productive. This is really important stuff, folks. I'm a salesperson myself. I have to sell the services that we do. We do get assistance from partners and internal folks who work with us, et cetera. But at the end of the day, I have to close these deals and bring money in the door to keep it all rolling. And so I'm very familiar with what goes on there. And there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into it. Well, these days you can really optimize your sales operations if you use Salesforce automation. So of course, the company Salesforce is sort of the poster child here. They've been around a long time, really surprisingly long. If you look back at when they went IPO, it's a long time ago. They're an old company these days. And the kernel of the technology was, not the best in the world, quite frankly, but old Mark Benioff, he knows how to run a software company, and they're now an absolute behemoth. They're huge. Tallest building in San Francisco, which I think might still be empty, ironically enough. But they're doing great stuff. But nonetheless, there are 7,000 or more, actually there's more than that, sales and automation technologies available today, software as a service, 7,000 plus that you can use. There's a lot of overlap in those tools, but at the end of the day, it all boils down to some kind of automation, some kind of improvement or enhancement to enrich the experience of the salesperson so they know who to call, when to call, what to say, how to say it. I mean, there are some really amazing technologies now that actually listen in on every conversation and kind of gauge the sentiment of the people on the call. They send notes to the salespeople when there are buy signals. This person's getting ready to buy just by the tone of voice. It's crazy what you can do. But our guests today have lots of technology in that space. So let's go ahead and open it up and bring in our first guest. We have Howard Brown calling in from Ring DNA. Howard, tell us a bit about your company and what you're doing in the space of sales automation.
Hey, Eric, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. And yeah, I loved hearing about Salesforce. This is actually my third company. I've been building on the Salesforce ecosystem since 2005. So Salesforce was quite a bit smaller back then. Ring DNA, we're really all about helping revenue teams unlock exponential growth. And we do that by solving the problem of aligning the right selling activities and conversations with buyers' needs in that moment. So you described some of our technology, actually. We listen in on every conversation. As a matter of fact, Ring DNA has listened in to 120 million hours of conversations, transcribed those conversations along with all the metadata and all the events that happened surrounding that sales process. And there's no more guess, right? There's no more waiting for training. Ring DNA is really about enabling sellers immediately to better align with buyers so that that data, that real-time data can really drive the process and make sure that your reps are contextually understanding the situation that they're in with the buyer. Because at the end of the day, it's really about providing that best user experience for your buyers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, you make an excellent point here. And That's pretty cool that you are doing what I've heard about. And folks, just total disclosure, I did not know that Ray and DNA did that. I just knew that there were some technologies doing that exact thing, which is very interesting. I mean, you see in call center space, in that industry, the people who can afford it are using some of these sentiment analysis algorithms to pick up on when someone's excited, when they're pissed off, for example, sending the big guns. If your top client is pissed off right now, you can do that just by listening in. And this, again, at a certain point, I will say there is such a thing as overkill, right? You can send too much information to your salesperson or customer service rep or whatever, but there is something to be said for giving them the best experience and doing that by giving the customer or the prospect the best experience, right, Howard?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you're talking about real-time technology, because Ring DNA actually owns 2 of those patents. So the patents are specifically around words that people are saying during conversations and then prompting them with what to talk about next, or what script to pop, or even which piece of content would help that and seller better align. So for us, it's really about understanding the context. You're right. It can be overkill. You could send too much information to your reps. You can overwhelm them. But what's really important is understanding the specific buying situation. And not all buying situations are the same. When you have a sales development rep and they're making a first outbound call to one of their prospects, the information that's important to them is very different than an account executive that's dealing with a procurement officer and trying to get that deal over the line. And so with Ring DNA's technology, we really understand where you are in the buying process so that the nudges or the recommendations we are making are completely contextual to the actual conversation. This is the future of guided selling. It's taking all of that information, all of that context, and providing a guided selling next best action for your reps.
Yeah, that's very impressive. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there are lots of ways that you could get there. I'd be curious to know how structured is the approach that your technology takes. And what I mean by that is, do you have intermediates, mid-level, executive, and how does your system sort of ascertain which words indicate the level of the sale or the point in time that the process is at right now? How do you do that?
Yeah, so again, context is key. And so with Ring DNA, we're not a single point solution. We actually integrate with marketing systems. So we know the source of the phone call, if it's an inbound call. We know all of the data inside of Salesforce.com. We know if it's a current customer, if they have support tickets. We know the title of the person that they're talking to. We know what stage the particular deal is in. We know if, for example, it is a late stage opportunity, and in late stage opportunities, what you say and how you handle a call is very different than what you do in an early stage call. So again, all of the context of the past emails, the past SMS, the past phone calls, all of that is brought into our engine before we make any sort of recommendation.
That's great. I mean, that's very, very interesting. So, and what you're able to do is feed that salesperson in real time. Does it come through, does it like track emails going back and forth, or is this primarily on calls, or it's omni-channel, or what?
Yeah, so it tracks emails, tracks SMS, tracks phone calls, tracks the words that are said in the phone calls, as well as the sentiment. Wow. It also tracks the marketing content and then intent data from third-party engines like 6 Sense or Demandbase. So we take all of that information to really inform the rep to better serve the buyer. At the same time, we're taking a historical snapshot of those phone calls so that we could then recommend to that rep and their manager where they may need some future training. So it's not just in the moment, it's also post-call analytics. And then we can set it up so that it recommends libraries for them to listen to or content for them to read. For example, if they handle pricing objection poorly, or if they don't know how to handle a competitor mention. All of that is the sort of things that we not only recommend in the moment how to best handle, but post-call, we make recommendations to both the reps and their managers for improvement.
That's very interesting stuff, folks. So great that we got you on the show. Stick around for the roundtable. Let's bring in our next guest. Chris Hartvigsen of Dooley is on the line. Chris, that's kind of the stuff that I'm hearing about, which is very interesting. Tell us a bit about what you folks are doing and how you're leveraging automation to improve sales.
So thanks again for having us on the show, Eric. It's awesome to be here today. Give you a little bit of background on how the company got started, which I think actually brings a lot of light to what we've built. A lot of us spent our years in the trenches selling, and we spent an inordinate amount of our time doing things that took us away from selling: the administrative work, the constant context switching to other applications in order to appease management, if you will, with the information that managers needed in order to look into the crystal ball and have a better idea of forecast. And what you end up with in those situations is really a light diet of information coming from the reps, because the rep only earns money when they're selling. And so we kind of looked at the areas where people were struggling, which was, transcribing information back over to Salesforce, updating fields, notifying people around the business of like competitor activity within their deals, and all of the rest of those different things that were happening. Said, okay, if all of us have a system to make ourselves successful in the offline sense, what if we brought that offline system into a really human, empathetic user experience and made a workspace where salespeople could actually manage their deals that allowed for them to not have to context switch, to not have to do all of the update work, et cetera. And I'll give you like a really great example. My last company, I spent 9 years in field, running teams and living around the world, kind of setting up different geographies and whatnot. We were closing deals like Major League Baseball, the National Football League, Telstra, National Geographic, Discovery Channel, like lots of really big names. When you're triple quota, nobody stops you in the hallway and says, Chris, awesome that you signed the National Football League. Just wondering, did you take the time to update the competitor field in Salesforce? Because I'm trying to run a report and I don't see that competitor information in there. And you're like, if I do that, I'm actually sacrificing my own paycheck. And I have no idea what you do with that competitor field anyway, because there's such massive latency between cause and effect of me inputting information and you actually doing anything with it. So we wanted to create this workspace, connected workspace that ties together all of the people and systems behind the scenes that need access to the information that you're capturing and trying to deliver to them without you having to leave that high value mode of selling. Nobody wants to be pushing a mop around during the day when they're selling. Nobody wants to be updating Salesforce.
That is pretty funny. So as someone who knows those pain points all too well, oh my goodness. I remember, not to get historic on us here, but let me think about this, mid 2000s, like early to mid 2000s, working with a big New York media company that was the first to promote this show, quite frankly, back in that's actually 08. So this is even later, like 2007, 2008. The CRM system that they were trying to have their salespeople use was just such a horrifying disaster. If they wanted you to use it and they forced you, and of course they forced you to use these different fields to enter the data, when you would go to update that thing and you'd hit the enter key, you just have to sit there and stare at a screen for about 5 minutes before it persisted and came back and, gave you the green light on something. And it's like, you want to talk about taking a salesperson out of their zone, like why not just kick him out of the cab into a gutter and say, make a sale now?
Yeah. I mean, a salesperson wants
So
to spend their time on
dark.
the field. A salesperson wants to spend their time on the field, and exactly to what you're saying, you might as well be asking them to go back to the locker room, tidy up their locker, make sure that their shirts are all folded, then go back in the middle of their at bat and go and take another swing. It's super frustrating. We just saw a world where that didn't need to be the case, and I think just if I were to almost be complimentary to what Howard is doing, it's like we almost work in symbiosis with one another to try to make it so that the rep has all of the information collected and aggregated from all of the different audio sources and emails and all that kind of stuff. And then they have the Dooley experience that will allow them to progress it.
Yeah, so talk about that. I mean, I understand conceptually what you're talking about, creating a workspace, right? Because it's always about that interface, how intuitive it is and how quickly it works to get specific jobs done. But what you're telling me sounds fantastic, because it's basically automation of key updates and metadata, which is what all the other reporting people want anyway. but the salesperson doesn't want to take the time doing. But if you can capture that, and this is the trend I'm seeing, you capture it from email activity, you capture it from phone calls, you capture it from ERP activity, whatever, and you know that something happened. And that's a hell of a lot better than knowing exactly precisely what happened. And besides which, even if they took the time to write it out in their own words, would anyone read all that stuff? Like, so there are all kinds of ways to optimize the key bits of information that are going to help the salesperson, right, Chris?
100%. Nobody wants to listen to 25 phone calls to get caught up on a deal. Nobody wants to read 30 notes. Nobody wants to read through all your emails. Everybody wants the Cliff Notes version of that story so that they can actually figure out how they can help and contribute and help drive those deals forward. And we're now in more of a team selling experience than we've ever been in. So connecting information is really important. What we did, like, you know, a couple of us are old enough to remember, I think we all are, to remember like the days before we had CRM back in like even like Act, Maximizer, and Rolodexes, and going back even further. And what we did is we took that filing cabinet metaphor and we just kept progressing it forward as a filing cabinet. And then we threw it up in a cloud and we went, aha, filing cabinet stuff in the cloud, people, go do your filing. And people were like, I didn't like doing filing back when it was manual on a piece of paper. I sure don't like it anymore here. So we wanted to try to create, again, something that was like, okay, well, this is how I work. And people don't need to hoard information. They're not willingly hoarding information. They just don't want to do things that take them out of what's important to them. 50% of your paycheck as a salesperson is predicated on your performance. And when your performance is so heavily weighted to your compensation, you're going to
60.
do everything you can, 60, 70, 80 in some cases, right? Sometimes it's 100. You know, go to commercial real estate and see what that's like, particularly right now when people are like leaving downtown cores. You have to stay in that high value mode all the time. And anything that takes away from it, you get super, super frustrated with. So instead of hoarding data, the idea that we thought of was okay, well, instead of having an Evernote, which is another data silo, or, you know, Salesforce was another data silo, why don't we actually just make it so all those data silos actually talk to each other and broker the information around? So we've taken more of the hub spoke distribution story into what we do, which is helping people to work at speed.
I want to be taken to the future where I don't have to do any of that boring admin stuff, and it all gets done for me, and we sell everything I can possibly sell and still deliver, and it works great. That's the future I want. And next up to help us get there is Mudu Sudhakar of Icera. He's a regular on the show these days. Mudu, tell us a bit about what you've heard so far, frankly, and where you see sales automation going and what you folks are doing to expedite that process.
Nick, pleasure to be here. Hello, Chris and Howard. Look, I think from Icera perspective, Icera is a startup company. Just as an introduction, we've been around for 4 years now. We are primarily focused on automating customer service, support, sales, and marketing. I actually call that whole area customer intelligence and customer experience. I think what sales and marketing is going towards, Eric, is not about, I think, as Howard, you mentioned, like opening up into Salesforce. Like something goes in Salesforce, you want to manage, that's after the fact, I call it. You want to find the person, the user, before it goes into a Salesforce. Like people are not going to enter tickets or notes in Salesforce. How many of you guys have seen that salespeople capturing all the information? It's not going to. So it will be too late as a signal. So I think what needs to happen is like what Google has done, what Amazon has done, what Facebook has done. Whether we like it or not, they change our society. They change our elections. So you want to capture the signal right in the wild, wild west, right when there people are out in the social media or in your web page or whatever conversations are happening. Conversations are not happening in Salesforce. That's why Salesforce acquired Slack. Actually, not just to use it only for the salespeople and employees, right? So I think conversations are happening in Zoom, like as we are doing in Zoom. Conversations are happening in Microsoft Teams, right? Conversations are going to happen in Slack. So how do you find these collaborative signals where the user information is there? How do you take the signal? That's what Icera specializes on, right? We are looking at those, and that's what I call customer intelligence. Capture that signal and then able to do it. See, something we have done with Zoom, and we have actually recently had a press release with on this side. We are automating for Zoom, and Zoom is like what, hundreds of millions of customers worldwide, right? What they have done is their billing use case, right? Billing, renewal, subscriptions, all of that is automated. Here we are talking about something, but Zoom has already done that with Icera. So Icera and Zoom, what we do is we automate all the billing requests, sales requests that are coming into them. whether it come through any channel. It could be through chat channel, it could be through email, voice, it can be through people going to their CRM system, right? CRM is just one channel these days.
Right. No, this is very interesting, because what you're basically alluding to here, folks, and this is a big deal, is that now that we're in this fully connected world, you can get signal from just about any channel. You can get signal from email, you can get signal from phone, you can get signal from activity in your ERP system, you can get signal from the market by going out and grabbing alternative data, for example, and seeing who's doing what sort of buying patterns are. You heard a couple guests even reference that already. There are these third-party enrichment data companies that can give you some information on who's Googling you, for example, or who's Googling these specific types of terms. That's what you happen to sell. So it's like there are so many ways to do it. And I think, Mudu, the key is to kind of figure out, number one, what do you have already in terms of technology and process, and then kind of break it all down. And I think both Chris and Howard were sort of alluding to this, and I say it all the time. In the sales process, like let's say you're an enterprise software company, that's who our clients tend to be. There are multiple steps in that process, and there are very different techniques and even terms that you should use in the process of getting them into the conversation. So what lures them in is not necessarily what you're going to sell them. You have to get them to notice you, then you have to get them to come to some event, then you have to get them to talk to your salespeople or your sales engineers. These are all different steps in the process that are very different, but all critical. Because if it falls apart at any point in that process, whether it's early, middle, or late, it fell apart and you lost some sale, right, Mudu?
That's right. Again, as you said, it's a journey, right? So the engagement will be, all of us have done the user will go through a journey, whether it's a B2B user or a B2C user. That's first is in education, thought leadership, they'll look for information, and you walk through that whole journey. But the key point though that I want to make is, if the user wants to upgrade your services, they want to renew something, they want to buy something, it's like the shopping cart experience. These things should be automated to the point you don't need a salespeople to do it.
Yeah.
That is where the AI is really coming there. And I saw some of the panelists talk about AI-driven automation, right? So if you look at, if you can take this to two levels, one is first understand the intent the user is asking. In AI, it's all about what does Eric really wants to do, right? And maybe I understand your intent, maybe I don't. But the idea is to understand what exactly you want, whether it's coming through in different channels, different signals, different vocabulary you use. Maybe your English isn't the same as my English, or maybe you speak different language. You may speak Japanese, Chinese, right? Understanding that and then taking a workflow action. So I think most often that's where the two things. And there are two technologies, by the way, Eric. One is called conversational AI. You're seeing that
Sure,
it's like your Alexa and Google for the enterprises. And conversational RPA, not the traditional RPA, because you want to use conversation to drive your workflow. These two things will change the sales automation forever, right?
Well, that's a really good point. So, and what Mudu's talking about here is what they call robotic process automation, which is one of the clumsier names of a technology space that I've heard. But basically, it refers to automating key processes, like when you onboard a new client, what does the process look like? And you make a good point, Mudu, that you want to automate the sort of simple stuff like upgrades and renewals and things of that nature. Automate as much of that as possible, because you don't want your salespeople wasting their time in that activity, unless, for example, you sense that maybe someone is not going to renew. And just here's an idea, right? Just to share what AI and ML and other sort of automation technology can do. You could notice, for example, you have a client that always renews in January, even though their license expires in March or something. And this time they didn't renew in January. They didn't renew in February, and March is coming up. Well, maybe that's a signal that you should have someone call them and find out. And then what you want to do is have your customer service people, and I see the customer success people these days doing stuff like this. Just pay attention, like, well, look into this account. It's the big account for us, see what's going on. Oh, it looks like there have been some problems. Then you can do some research and prep. And then you have the customer success team call, hey, we noticed this is happening. We want to do this for you, et cetera, et cetera. You're trying to prevent churn, but doing that in an intelligent way, right, Mudu?
You're right. And actually, by the way, I do this thing already with a customer called McAfee. Right? You guys all know McAfee. So one thing McAfee executive vice president by the name Anil, he has done it is he's automated the sales and automation to the point. Remember, McAfee have consumer users, like my parents use the product too, right? It's like every walk of life. then the idea there is don't wait for the user to ask a request. To your point, renewal, instead of going the customer success team, can you actually have you reach out to the users proactively? Right? If I reach out to Eric, in this way the AI will do anytime better than assigning to humans. These are mundane, repetitive tasks. It should not be given to customer success people. It should not be given to sales people to do it. This is where you should use automation. Only when the user had something that the AI cannot do it, then that's when you should go to the sales team. So sales automation should be, look, let's automate the mundane, repetitive, common tasks that sales should not be, humans should not be doing. Right?
Yeah.
This is where I think the whole CRM should be taken to the next level of sales automation, marketing automation.
Well, that's actually, so that's a good segue to kind of blend into the roundtable here. I'll bring Howard Brown back in to comment on this from Ring DNA. And Mudu makes a really good point, which is to say that we have this whole sort of ecosystem of functionality and processes and people and touch points and so forth. And the fact is there's a lot of crossover or overlap between sales and marketing and customer success, et cetera. And you want to really optimize what is that process and worldview, if you will, of your salesperson. So they're not doing things that are going to take away from the ability to make a sale, right? The whole opportunity cost. But what do you think about that cohesive sort of 360-degree view that Mudu was talking about, Howard?
Yeah, I mean, that's been the holy grail since I've been in technology. So we've been talking about essentially collapsing the silos of sales, marketing, and CX for years. We actually can do it now. And that's the beauty between storage, processing power, and then a movement towards revenue operations where you have a single leader that's highly focused on aligning these different efforts. And that's a big part of Ring DNA. We have 5 different products across marketing, sales, and CX that all align to create normalized data layer so that I know exactly what to do next. And it's not just any rep, it's this specific rep based on their skills, their training, and their book of business, who they should be focused on, what they should be saying, and where they need education, what should they be sending, and so on. And that, to me, is the holy grail, because in today's economy, which is really about a user economy, if I'm not providing the best experience for my end users, they're gone. So what will differentiate companies that have success now and those that fail will be providing that best experience for their customers and their prospects, which means you have to know what my support tickets are. You have to know where I am in the buying process. You have to know what I'm upset about before you try and sell me something else. I've had multiple experiences where I have broadband tickets with my internet provider, and I just want my broadband fixed. And in the meantime, the wireless guy is calling me up to sell me wireless. And I tell him, look, if you fix my broadband, I'd gladly buy your wireless service. But because it's different database and these guys have no idea what the left hand and the right hand are doing, it's aligning that to provide a better experience for our customers, which ultimately will drive revenue and the bottom line.
Yeah. Well, folks, what a fantastic show today. Big thanks to all of our guests. Howard Brown, calling from Ring DNA, Chris Hartvigsen from Dooley, and of course, Mudu Sudhakar from Icera. We do archive all these webinars for later listening. Send me an email. We're booking the rest of the year right now. Time flies. Can you believe the year is more than half over? That's kind of freaky. But we'll talk to you next time, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.